Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
For FOR Friends of Ron, I'm your host, Ron Levitsky. Many centuries ago, the great English poet John Donne wrote a poem entitled At the Round Earth's Imagined Corners. And I love that title because it kind of tells us something about ourselves and the way we look at the rest of the world. Imagined corners that people don't always know what's out there in the world. And so we try to imagine things and make the world fit our own minds rather than trying to expand our minds to get into the world. Many centuries later, Daniel Boorstin, who was a professor of history and wrote a book called The Image, wrote in that book that Americans like to go places that look like America. So even when we go to different places like Disney World in another country, we make it look very much like America, or stereotype the country, like the Hawaiian shirt that I'm wearing is representing Hawaii. Well, are there ways in which one can get into the world and really learn about it as a traveler? The answer is yes, there is. And we have with us today someone who does just that in her few days of the year that she has spare time. Chris Roberts, a good friend of mine, so I want to welcome to the show Chris of the
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. And not only we're friends, we were colleagues because we taught at the same school you continue to teach at Sunset Ridge in Northfield. And what do you teach?
I teach 7th grade social studies, which is a world geography curriculum for the most part.
So it really ties into travel.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start off by looking a little bit at your background. Tell us a little bit about your early life, where you were born and raised, and early education.
Yeah, I mean, that's already a tough question because when people ask where you're from, I don't have a good answer. My dad was in the military, so I grew up
It's not the witness protection
around.
program.
No,
okay.
at least not as far as I know. But we did move often, and so maybe that nomadic spirit got in me from a young age. But we settled down eventually when I was in high school and college in Washington State, which is a place that's still near and dear to my heart, and both in terms of geography and vibe. But I've lived in Chicago longer than I've lived anywhere.
And when you grew up, did you live outside the country at all?
Yep, we did a 3-year stint in Japan when I was in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And that was amazing, super wonderful experience. My brother and I were kind of minor celebrities because we had this like white blonde hair and people would take pictures with us.
Weren't you kind of tall?
Well, not as a child, but I think they probably thought we were ghosts or something because we were so scanty looking.
And what about college?
College, I went to undergrad in Washington State, and then I moved out to Chicago to go to graduate school at U of C, and then eventually decided to become a teacher and ended up at Northwestern doing...
Quite a pedigree. That's very interesting. And I understand that you went to University of Chicago Divinity School.
Correct.
But you didn't go there to become a minister.
No. I've always been interested in religion. I was raised in the Lutheran tradition, which, I don't necessarily follow that anymore, but I still am drawn to religion. I love learning about people's stories, and I've always liked a good story, and I feel like religions have some of the best stories. So I went to Divinity School to study that. I think University of Chicago has a very unique situation for people who are interested in religion because they put the academic track people in with the ministry track and kind of force them to learn together side by side, which ends up being really good for both parties.
And I understand it from
to a thicker heel.
I've actually been to Israel many, many times.
Yeah, many times. That started when I was an undergrad. I was a humanities major, which kind of fits with the type. It's all imaginary. And so I was interested in religion, and it seemed like a great place to start because it's relatively small in terms of space, but super diverse and a long history.
And you told me that you're also interested in linguistics.
Yeah, I've always been interested in languages and trying to learn them. They seem like secret codes in a way that could just open up all kinds of things. So when I went to Israel the first time, started learning Hebrew, modern Hebrew, and just kind of got drawn to it and stuck with it.
And you lived on a kibbutz.
I did. That was in between undergrad and graduate school. I'm so glad I had that experience. I think it used to be easier to do. Now that system is not quite as common, and so it's a rare thing, and I feel lucky to have had it. But it's really interesting. It's, you know, obviously being in a foreign country, being in Israel, but then also getting to experience socialism in a way.
Oh, okay. So you found it an interesting experience.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And did you think
$175
become a teacher?
I didn't. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I mean,
You'd recommend
Well,
having your own.
and maybe studying and studying and studying, getting a PhD, perhaps going into academia. While I was working on my master's in Hyde Park, I was working part-time as a TA in a local public school.
Teaching assistant.
Yeah. And just found that maybe I had energy for that at that stage of my life rather than spending hours and hours in the library looking at something that was interesting to me and maybe for other people. But
Now, given your academic background and your academic interest, what drew you to middle school? That's because being a middle school teacher, it's kind of an odd group of people who do that.
yeah, they're not for everyone, but I love them. And I think I maybe said this to you at one point that for me it's part penance, part passion. Like, I know I was a nightmare when I was in 7th grade, and I feel like I owe it to the world to kind of help others through that. It's a tough age to be. I really feel for the kids. I think it's an endurance test more than anything. It's not like the beautiful years necessarily, but at the same time, there's a curiosity that those kids have that I don't know that many of us are able to maintain throughout our adulthood, but I really love it. If you can capture their curiosity, they just have the most amazing ideas, and they're not quite as jaded maybe as high school kids would be.
Well, yeah, and talking about curiosity, so how does this connect? I mean, I guess it's fairly easy to see as a world geography teacher, so to speak, that you travel yourself.
Yeah.
So but can you explain how these two dovetail to one another?
Right. Well, I think one of the things I love about teaching, and it's going to sound so cliche, is this whole idea of lifelong learning that people talk about. But I honestly believe in it, and it's what drew me to the profession, is always having more to explore and to learn about. And I think that is true in travel as well, that with the right mindset and just keeping a long list of who you're willing to learn from, where you're willing to learn, it's never ending. And I think that kind of makes both the travel and the teaching not so different from each other, but maybe two sides of the same coin.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. We're going to take a look at a few of the places you've been in the last 5-6 years.
Okay.
And then we're going to go into more detail on some other places. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get these pictures up, but our wonderful director, Larry, that's a lovely picture. And tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, this picture was taken in Iceland, and it is a wonderful picture, and I say that not to toot my own horn, but like anyone can look like a National Geographic photographer when you go to Iceland, because everything is that beautiful. It is just the most awesome place I've ever been in terms of physical geography. Like, everywhere you look, it almost hurts your eyes, the beauty of it, and the rainbows and the diversity. I mean, if a unicorn came around the corner, you'd be like, of course, that's so fitting, right? It really is that spectacular.
Well, let's go to the next picture, which is kind of a juxtaposition as we get that up. Okay, so we're not in Iceland anymore.
No. This picture was taken in Morocco, in the part of Morocco that touches the Sahara Desert. What I like about this picture is that you can see on the margin, the edge there's people, and people live here. I mean, we were on camels as part of a professional tour, operation going to see some stars at night. But people live here, and I think it just speaks to how resilient people are to live places and what their lifestyle is like because of the geography. And it's beautiful too, in a less obvious way maybe than Iceland.
Yeah. Next one, please. So, okay.
Okay, so this guy, this was taken in Vietnam. That's the Mekong River. And interestingly, it kind of goes with the one we just saw, even though they might initially seem very opposite. Just the importance of water, which again, I don't want to insult people's intelligence. We know we need water to live, but just the power of water to shape people's lives, whether it's scarce or abundant. And in this case, those are water buffalo that if you see them on land, they look very heavy, which they are, and cumbersome, and whatever. And they go in the water, and they're just like, they're graceful. And so the power of water, not just to make life possible, but to transform something heavy into something beautiful and graceful.
Okay, and the next one?
Okay, so this is underground in Istanbul in Turkey, and it's right near some of the famous mosques like the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque in downtown Istanbul. But what I like about this is going back to the idea of stories and religion. This was built during the time when Istanbul had already switched over to Christianity in like the 500s, and they took and sort of recycled pillars from what had been a Roman temple. So that's a head of Medusa. But they were careful to turn her upside down because she can't turn people to stone when she's upside down, apparently. So I just love stories like that where they don't like the old tradition. They're trying to bring in something new, but they're still going to be careful about making sure she doesn't have power.
Yeah.
That's a water cistern underneath the streets of Istanbul in Turkey.
Wow. Okay, next please. Next one, we're going to go to Europe, which is not unusual for you.
Yeah, so this picture was taken in Prague, in the old city of Prague, and that's a synagogue called the Old New Synagogue. It's one of the oldest synagogues anywhere in Europe. And it might be a little hard for your viewers to see, but there are some bits of ladder on the outside of that building, and that's because in the Jewish tradition, there is a story about the golem that I'm sure many people will be familiar with. It's just like, right, a lot of people compare him to Frankenstein. I don't know if I would go down that road exactly, but he was a creature created out of clay to protect the Jews in Eastern Europe. And the story here is that he ran amok and got out of control, and so the rabbi who created him had to remove the power source, and he lives now in the golem in the attic of this synagogue, supposedly. So
Okay.
I don't know. It's a good story.
It is a great story. It's a great story. Next, now we're going to continue to this will be in the outskirts of Europe, so to speak.
Yeah, this one I just took a couple months ago. I was in the Faroe Islands, which are part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but in the North Atlantic. And they were settled by Vikings. And again, what I'm interested here, kind of like the Medusa head, it shows the combination of traditions. So this is a footprint of a witch, and they have a whole story about a witch who had a troll baby and a man who was trying to steal her troll baby. And as she was chasing him, she made this footprint. But he ran to the local church for safety. And so you kind of have like the Old Norse mythology blending with the arrival of Christianity. And again, Christianity doesn't necessarily displace it, at least not in one fell swoop. It sort of gets tacked on as, the sequel.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the last photo for this set.
So Ron, this picture, I think I sent this to you.
Yes.
I took this in 2015. This is outside the city of Nablus, which is in the West Bank. And that guy is, he's the brother of the high priest of the Samaritan people, who are just super fascinating, and maybe people have heard of them from the Christian scriptures, but they have a lot of interesting history, and currently, in present times, they have a really interesting role. They're really between the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Jews and the Muslims, but just very welcoming people. They've got a lot of great stories. And I thought he looked like you, which is why
Yes,
another
yes.
reason I like this picture is it just, you're in some place random and I'm like, oh, that could be Ron.
Could well be.
Yeah,
I could have
maybe
Samaritan in
distant-
me.
distant cousin.
Absolutely. And was it difficult to get into the West Bank at the time?
It can be difficult. I was pretty lucky. I had a person who was driving for me who was able to make that a little bit easier.
This was in 2015.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually easier for, obviously, non-Israelis than...
Well, let's talk. Can we come back to us now, Larry?
Yeah.
Thank you. Great job with the slides. Thank you. So that brings up, before I go into some of the trips in detail, so how do you decide where you want to go?
I think there are two big draws for me. One is the geography, and a lot of times it's the mountains because we live here where it's like, so I honestly feel like I get a craving for elevation, and so I start looking for places that have some mountains. And then the other is the stories, and I just read a lot, and if I come across something like the Samaritans where I didn't even really know they were still around, or the Faroe Islands, or some of the stuff I saw in Ethiopia, it just makes me curious to go and see the setting of the stories and see the people who tell them, and just maybe to hear it straight from the folks.
Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't expect you to go on a trip to Hawaii or a Disney cruise, things like
I mean,
that.
a Disney cruise might be a stretch, but I don't know. I want to kind of practice what I preach. Don't cross anything off your list, even if it's like this isn't necessarily for me.
And you were in Jamaica not long ago. It might be different on a Friday.
To be traveling
Absolutely correct. But I would
more
like,
of an inside track, but yeah, I wouldn't say of any place don't go there. We all have to kind of find the places that draw us. And even if you go someplace that's maybe a little quote unquote easier or more accessible, there's still ways to make it exciting.
Okay, and you told me that two trips that especially. Oh, actually, and I wanted to also ask, you kind of travel differently from a lot of people. Can you explain the decisions you make about how you travel?
Yeah, for many years, this isn't always true, but for many years now, I've almost always traveled by myself. There are many reasons for that. I mean, probably other people will tell you it's better. I'm hard to get along with, especially on a long road trip. But it's also, I think, any travel that you do by choice is pretty selfish in a way. And I kind of taken that to a bit of an extreme where I know what I want to see. I want to see that. So that's a piece of it. I just want to do what I want to do and see the things that are important to me. But I also think it's good for me to be challenged in the sense that I got to figure it out. There's not going to be somebody else there to point me in a direction. And I'm a bit introverted. And so having to talk to people and being able to talk to people and making connections with people because I am alone and I do need help.
And you sometimes go off the beaten path, as we'll see in a moment.
I think so. I don't know. I have yet to find the beaten path. I don't know what the beaten path is, but
Well,
yeah.
you tend to, as you say, make things, my impression,
take out your benchmark ball.
your own way,
Yeah,
as opposed to getting on a tour and following along.
I think that's true. I think, again, part of that is just following my own interests. But then, as you travel, you meet people and they tell you about things you didn't know before, and it sort of dominoes into where you should go and what.
Okay, so two trips that really important seemed to be especially important to you. One was a trip you took to India in 2005, and one was a trip you took to Ethiopia in 2016. And when we talked about this earlier, you used the term, both those trips were category breaking.
Yeah,
Epic geography,
yeah.
deep history. So why did you choose those two to kind of focus on?
I think they both
We're here, a valley.
things that just really light me up, and that's the physical geography and the religion and the stories and the history. And I don't think I really knew exactly how epic they were till after I'd been there. I mean, India is so old, so diverse, so many people that anything you go to say about it is probably true and probably false, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a bunch of slides. First on India, then on Ethiopia. So let's
Okay.
run through these if we can. We'll start with India. Oh, okay. There's a truck.
Yeah, so trucks there are beautiful, and I didn't know this before I went, but this is like a thing for them, that they take a lot of pride in their truck. The truck drivers are on the road for a long time. It becomes a second home, but a lot of the ways that they decorate include religious symbology and stories and, you know, local deities, and they're just beautiful, and they also have a lot of symbolism to them, so
Okay.
that's why I like that one.
Next one, please.
Okay, so this picture, you can learn so much in traffic, I think. A couple things about this, I'll just toss them out, and then, you know, if you want to say anything about it. But in some ways, this is an idea I'm working on, so I might change my mind later, but I feel sometimes like fear is a bit of a luxury. Like if you have lots of options, you can be afraid of this and avoid it. But in other places, they're not scared. They just go, because that's the way you get from place to place. And, you know, things like seatbelts and car seats are just not even on the radar. And so they go. But also, like, this woman is immaculate. And, like, a lot of people think of India as being dirty and there's, you know, junk all over. And you can find certainly nasty stuff, but she's very, very put together. And then you know, thinking about us as junior high teachers, and we've had this endless debate about dress code. So in this part of India, it's super common for women, even older women, to wear a type of sari where the midriff is exposed, which would not fly at Sunset Ridge according to the dress code. But if you go there and expose your shoulder, it's scandalous. So it's just back to this idea of imagined, you know,
Yes.
whatever they are, corners or dress codes or
Yeah.
whatever. Just how subjective some of those things that we hold
Okay.
so fast to are.
Let's skip the next one if we can, Larry, and go to the one after that. Yeah, the rice.
Yeah, so this was just very interesting to me in terms of thinking about Indian mindset. This is in northern India near Dharamsala, where they eat a lot of rice, they grow rice, and they have had people from NGOs come in and consult and suggest that they switch to growing wheat, because wheat would produce a higher yield, you could feed more people, more calories, blah, blah, blah. And they just listen, and they're like, yeah, but we eat rice. And like, it's just, it's like, thank you for coming, the wheel continues, and
Okay.
you know, that's just, I don't know, I like that story.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. Now we go to Ethiopia.
This is the Nile River. Every place in East Africa claims to have the source of the Nile River, and there are a couple of branches that feed into it. The one in Ethiopia is here at Lake Tana, which is one of the sources of it, and I just thought that was a beautiful picture, and just the idea that having the source of the Nile is, you know, something Europeans looked for forever and ever. Meanwhile, folks were living on it for thousands of years.
Okay, next one, please.
This is a church, the Miriam Sion Church in Aksum, which is where the Ark of the Covenant is, the one that Indiana Jones was after, that was, you know, once in the temple in Jerusalem. And this to me speaks to the way that Ethiopians think about religion. When you said that, I guess you quoted me back to me, the category breaking. They don't separate necessarily what we would call fact from religious stories. And the same person who's telling you about a victory of the Ethiopian army over the Italians will tell you that they won because they brought out the Ark of the Covenant, and they don't miss a beat. And it, you know, it just all kind of flows. And I really appreciate that sort of non-leaping faith that they seem to have.
Yeah. Okay, next one. The next one's one of my favorite pictures because I love dogs.
Yeah, they do many, many panels of this type of art in all Ethiopian churches. They have church in the round. And some of them depict stories from the Bible or other Christian sources. But this one, I asked 3 different people because I wanted to make sure I was getting it right. And this was just a local story about a man who wandered away to become a monk. And when he returned home, he was so changed inside and out that his family didn't recognize him, but the family dogs did.
That's a lovely story.
Yeah.
Okay, let's come back to us if we can, Larry. And because of the time, we're going to play a word game
Okay.
where I'm going to bring up some questions,
Super.
and then you, of your travels, come up with something. Just let it flow. So, all your travels, what was your favorite food?
I'm a sucker for bread, so I'll eat anyone's bread. I love it. You can find it anywhere. I'm a vegetarian too, so that's a good go-to.
Okay. And what would you say the most beautiful landscape you've ever seen?
Down the lane, 10 feet down the lane to about 13 feet down.
Scenery is breathtaking, but just this summer I was in the Faroe Islands, and same thing. It's not as necessarily obvious, but dramatic, and it goes hand in hand with the people.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What's the most impressive building or edifice, man-made structure you've ever seen on your trips?
In Uzbekistan, they have a minaret that was one of the few surviving structures from prior to Genghis Khan, and it's beautiful, and it's lovely to look at, but it's also cool because it survived. And again, there's a story that he looked up at it and his hat fell off, and so he took that as a sign that he was being asked by the universe to remove his hat out of respect for this building, and so he didn't tear it down. And he wrecked everything else throughout Asia, Central Asia, East Asia. So
Wow.
yeah.
The strongest friendship you made?
That's hard. My driver in Ethiopia was a really great guy. He, I think, trusted me in a way that I didn't necessarily expect, because when you go to Ethiopia as a woman, you can't drive yourself, and they don't have set up for a rental car anyway, and so we were both a little wary of each other, but I think, he got on board with this idea of she might want to walk up that mountain by herself, or, she'll figure out how to talk to these people.
And you were in Ethiopia for a month,
All straighter.
so you were with that guy a long time.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think the biggest stereotype that was refuted,
Pin hitting another into another.
found out wasn't true?
I think it's this idea that some places are dangerous, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that will disagree with me, but I sort of feel like safe is a state of mind in some ways. I mean, there are a lot of terrible things happening here in our Chicagoland area, and so to write off a country or a part of the world as, oh, they're dangerous over there, they're violent people, to me just doesn't ring true with any of the experiences I've had. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I mean, the point is you meet all kinds of people everywhere, and
Okay.
it's true.
If you could transport your students
One pin.
anywhere in the world, where would you take them?
Does it
You could try to scrape.
in Jamaica, I would love, and it's a little bit of a heavy history, but to take them from Ghana, from the slave castles in Ghana, to the markets in New Orleans, to the plantations in Jamaica, and just track that, and then go back to Chicago and talk about redlining in the South Side, and sort of close the circle.
Okay.
That would be it.
And the last one, if you were president of the United States, how would our foreign policy be different?
Are we out of time?
Oh, you don't have to answer that.
Yeah, I don't think I will. I'd like to keep my job.
Okay, but you did say
The better.
there was this paradox of seeing tremendous diversity, but also at the same time common humanity.
Yeah.
So let's close on that if we.
You can do it.
Yeah, everywhere I've been just struck by things that I didn't even know existed. I didn't even know that was a thing in the world or a way to organize your life. And so there's the diversity of human experience and stories and the way that people live and get through. And I love that diversity. I think it's really what enriches our experience. But then also the common humanity of just being helped by people. I think my life kind of runs on the kindness of strangers, and to feel that bond and to feel like there's some life struggles or life joys that we all can get through, whether it's big or simple.
Well, Chris, thanks so much. I knew this would be interesting. I didn't realize how fascinating it really would be. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Believe me, it was my pleasure. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Ron Levitsky saying, see you next time for What's This Show For, FOR, Friends of Ron. Bye-bye for now.